to him. Mr. Moody said goodbye and went on the boat, but the words kept ringing in his mind. The world has yet to see. The world has yet to see. And by the time he reached New York, he said, I'll be that man. And that really is part of the success of D.L. Moody. A man wholly given over to God. Listen, couldn't we repeat those words tonight to every person here? Because I believe that this is the message for tonight. I believe that it's a message to you. The world has yet to see. A young man, a young woman, a person wholly given over to God. What God would do through that man. And would you be prepared to say tonight with all your might, I'll be that man. I'll be that woman. I'll be that person. Nothing's going to come in between. Nothing's going to stop it. I'll be that man. Think of what God could do with your life. Well, I look at some of you here tonight. You've got much more than I ever had. More education, more qualifications, more everything. I don't know where to begin. And listen, I'm old and you're young. You've got your life in front of you. You've got everything. Everything. And if God can use me, I'll tell you this, he could use you if you're prepared to surrender yourself to God. We've all heard of Paganini, haven't we? Paganini was playing in this great concert. And those who were right at the front could see that something was amiss. He'd broken 3 strings on his violin. Before long, there's only one left. And they said he'll have to stop. But he didn't. He carried on. And this violin in the hands of a master, played the most beautiful music that they'd ever heard. Listen, a life in the hands of the master. What is that in thine hand? And he said, a rod. My last point is concerning surrender. I want you to read again with me verses 19 and 20. And the Lord said unto Moses in Midian, go return into Egypt, for all the men are dead that sought thy life. And Moses took his wife and his sons and set them upon an ass, and he returned to the land of Egypt. And Moses took the rod of God in his hand. Look at the call here. Because in that verse 19 it says, go return into Egypt. Now you say, what's remarkable about that? I'll tell you what's remarkable. It's the 4th time that God had said it. 4th time that God had said it. Check it out if you like. Chapter 3 verse 10, chapter 3 verse 16, chapter 4 verse 12, and then verse 19. 4 times. Isn't it wonderful that God is patient and he's persistent in our lives? Spoken to you before, hasn't he? Spoken to me so many times. And I'm thankful tonight that God is patient and persistent. For 42 years, David Thomas in Wales slipped a love letter in the letterbox of his neighbour Rachel Jones. Years before, they'd gone out together. They hoped to marry, but they'd had a lover's tiff and not spoken to each other since. And each day, he brought the letter and put it in the letterbox. And each day, she took the letter and burned it unopened. Till finally, one day, he went to the house and he knocked on the door. And he spoke to her. And he said, will you marry me? And she said, yes, I will. And they got married. They were 74, each of them. 74 years of age. 42 years. That's persistence. But think of all the years that they missed. The Lord is speaking to you tonight. Imagine coming back here in 40 years' time. I won't be here. Some of you will, if the Lord tarries. And God speaks to you again. And finally, you say yes. But what about the years you've missed? What about the years the locusts have eaten? Tragic, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it be tragic? Don't let it happen. Don't let it happen. Look at the compliance. At last, in verse 20, Moses took his wife, his sons, set them up on ass. He returned to the land of Egypt, and Moses took the rod of God in his hand. The compliance. At last, he's yielded to God. It shows that he's totally surrendered by taking his wife and his children, his boys with him. There's no turning back. He's burnt his bridges. There's no looking back. He's going now, and there's only one thing that he took with him. What was it? The rod of God. This shows his faith in the power of God. What's in your hand? A rod. And that's the only thing that he took with him. He didn't take anything else. He just trusted God, and he believed that God would do it. But it's a rod that's consecrated. It's a rod that's dedicated. Here's a man yielded to God, wielded by God, and will be shielded with God in the future. I quoted here General Booth. There was another occasion when someone asked him the secret of his happiness. And he said this: I never say no to God. I never say no to God. Matthew Henry said, if religion is worth anything, it's worth everything. Do you believe that? If it's worth anything, it's worth everything. So finally, we come to his commission. If you read verses 21 to 23, you'll see the commission. But let me just show you verse 21. And the Lord said unto Moses, when thou goest to return to Egypt, see that thou do all these wonders before Pharaoh. He will do wonders. Now, of course, you know as well as I do, he wasn't perfect. There were many battles that he had to fight. There were many upsets that he had. There were many disappointments that would come in his life. But here's a man who was going to do wonders. He was going to confront Pharaoh. And to do that, he needed courage and commitment and faith and obedience and trust. He had to be single-eyed. But he was going to do wonders. Oh, my friend, tonight, I have to say to you, if there are those here tonight who really consecrate and dedicate themselves, you're going to do wonders for God. Wonders for God. What's in your hand? Abel would say, a lamb that I'm going to sacrifice for God. Mary would say, a jar of ointment that I'm going to pour forth. The woman we heard about last night in the temple would say, 2 mites, going to give them entirely unto the Lord. Dorcas would say, a needle that I'm going to give to God. Moses would say, a rod, but it's given to God and becomes God's. All for Jesus. All for Jesus. All my being's ransom powers. All my thoughts and words and doings. All my days and all my hours. Would you be prepared to say that? We often quote Mr. Spurgeon. What a wonderful man he must have been. He said one day he was walking round a cemetery and he was looking at the tombstones and he came across a most remarkable tombstone. At the top of the tombstone it just said, Freddie. Must have been the man's name, Freddie. And underneath there was just one word. Nothing about his life, nothing about when he was born and died. It just said, yes. And Mr. Spurgeon said, I imagine that man was a Christian. And somehow this man, Freddie, there he was. There's nothing about his life or what he did, but he was a man who said yes to the Lord. What about you tonight? What is that in thine hand? A rod. Are you prepared to say yes to the Lord? Do it now.
You've been listening to the Chapel Hour, coming to you from the campus of Bob Jones University. Our speaker was Dr. Brian Green, pastor of Calvary Free Grace Baptist Church in Middlesex, England. His message was preached during the 2007 Bible Conference. For a cassette or compact disc copy of today's message, send a check for $6 to Campus Store, Bob Jones University, Greenville, South Carolina 29614. Be sure to mention the name of the speaker and today's date. The Chapel Hour has been sponsored by Bob Jones University.